My husband never cooked until that night. And now I wonder if that steak was meant to be my last meal. The scent hit first, butter, garlic, something vaguely sweet and smoky. I stood in the hallway watching him, apron on, humming an old 80s tune like he'd done this 1,000 times before. He looked normal, happy even. Sophie sat at the kitchen counter kicking her feet under the stool, beaming. "Mommy, he's making mashed potatoes," she whispered like it was a holiday miracle. Dylan turned, flashed that smile I used to fall for, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and said, "Dinner in 10. He hadn't cooked a meal in over a decade, not once, not even when I had the flu, not when Sophie turned 5 and asked for pancakes shaped like stars. Back then, he was always too busy or afraid to ruin the kitchen. So yes, I was surprised. And yes, a tiny part of me wanted to believe this was a gesture, something small but meaningful, a reset button. But the way his eyes lingered on me just a second too long as he stirred the pot, it didn't feel like kindness. The table was already set when I walked in. The nice plates, the ones we barely touched unless it was Thanksgiving. Sophie had folded paper napkins into little fans. She was giddy, humming along to the playlist Dylan had queued up. I sat down slowly, scanning the meal. Seared steak, green beans tossed in olive oil, and mashed potatoes. They looked a bit too glossy, too perfectly piped like they'd been plated for a food blog shoot. He sat across from us, elbows on the table, hands folded under his chin, watching. "I hope it's good," he said too evenly. "Tried something new." We each dug in. Sophie bounced her legs under the table as she ate, giggling at the crispiness of the green beans. I took a bite of the potatoes. The texture was strange, creamier than usual, almost gluey. There was an aftertaste, faintly bitter, like aspirin crushed into cream. I reached for my water, throat tightening just a little. Across the table, Sophie wrinkled her nose. "It tastes funny," she said softly. Dylan chuckled. "Guess I'm not as good a cook as I thought." He stood, grabbed his plate, still half full, and walked it to the sink. My stomach gave a low, unsettled twist. I blinked, trying to focus. The lights felt slightly brighter, the music a little louder. I turned to Sophie. She was rubbing her tummy with one hand, blinking slowly. "Mommy." My tummy hurts. I forced a smile, placing a hand on her back. My other hand was shaking under the table. The fork slipped from my fingers, clinking against the plate. Dylan was still at the sink, scrubbing like he was trying to erase something. Slow, circular motions, fingers pressed hard. Then, like a switch, my body felt wrong. My head grew heavy, my tongue thick in my mouth. I tried to lift my arms. They twitched but didn't rise. Panic started to rise, fast and cold, but I swallowed it. I knew that feeling. I'd seen it on ER patients, sedatives, potent ones. My vision blurred around the edges. Sophie leaned into me. Her breath was warm against my arm, but she was slumping too. "Mommy." I looked to Dylan. He wasn't looking at us. He was still washing, still humming, still not caring. My heart thundered in my ears, the instinct loud. Something was wrong. Deeply, horribly wrong. I tried to stand. My legs buckled. I fell back into the chair, then slid to the floor, dragging Sophie with me. If this was what I thought it was, then time was slipping away fast. My fingers grazed her arm, barely able to grip. She whispered, "Mommy, are you okay?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I turned my head slowly, just enough to see him watching from the corner. Our eyes didn't meet, but I could tell he was waiting. Not worried, not rushing, just waiting. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab Sophie and run, but I couldn't. Not yet. I turned toward Sophie, my vision blurry, and she whispered, "Mommy." My tummy hurts. I couldn't move. My body betrayed me, but my mind refused to go quiet. Somewhere beyond the blur of my vision, the faucet ran in a steady stream, each drop splashing into the sink like a countdown. My cheek was pressed to the cold kitchen tile, my limbs useless, my breath shallow. Sophie was a warm weight against my side. her tiny fingers twitching slightly in my palm. The silence between us wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that screamed. The air carried the faint scent of butter and garlic, but layered beneath it now was something else. Bleach, the sterile tang of cleanup. Dylan was humming again, that same tune, the same upbeat melody he'd danced to during college parties. I remembered because that was the night I kissed him for the first time. Now that song made my stomach turn. He moved with practiced ease, rinsing each plate, scrubbing like he had all the time in the world. My husband, the man who once ordered takeout 3 nights in a row because he couldn't find the colander, was now meticulously washing every fork and glass. He didn't look at us. He didn't ask if we were okay. He just kept cleaning. Somewhere inside me, a switch flipped. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to quiet the instinct to flinch or cry out. My muscles wouldn't respond anyway, but the will, that part of me that had always protected Sophie, was alive and screaming. I stared at the mashed potatoes on the floor beside us. A single dollop had splattered from Sophie's plate during the fall. It gleamed under the soft light, unnaturally smooth, like frosting piped on a poisoned cake. That wasn't mashed potatoes. That was a lie, plated and served with a smile. I thought back, 12 years of marriage, and not once had Dylan cooked for us. Not when I gave birth. Not even on our anniversaries. He always joked that the only thing he could cook was cereal. So why tonight? Why now? Because he knew we wouldn't survive it. Because he didn't want us to. My fingers tingled faintly, blood returning, maybe, or panic. Either way, I tried to squeeze Sophie's hand, a small pulse, barely there, but she moved, just enough for me to know she felt it. I listened. Dylan set a plate on the drying rack, glass on glass. He wasn't rushing, he was winding down. I could hear him wiping the counters now, the soft scrape of cloth over formica, no urgency, no guilt. Then he spoke. His voice was low, too low for Sophie, but I caught it. Every word. "It's done," he said. "They'll both be gone soon." The breath hitched in my throat. A fresh wave of nausea surged. Not from the poison. No, this was worse. This was betrayal distilled. The man I'd once trusted with my life had just sentenced me and our daughter to death. Casually, like he was confirming a grocery list. He walked past us. His shoes tapped lightly across the floor, unhurried. My heartbeat counted every step. I didn't dare move. I didn't blink. I waited. When I couldn't hear him anymore, I shifted. Slowly. My lips barely parted, breath shallow against Sophie's temple. Her skin was damp, clammy. Her eyes fluttered, half-lidded, still trying to focus. She needed me. I summoned what little strength I had and brought my mouth closer to her ear. "Don't move yet." The words were thinner than a whisper, more like a thought carried on air. But she heard. I felt the tension in her body change, her breathing grow steady. She trusted me. That gave me strength I didn't know I had left. The silence stretched again, and then the floor creaked in the hallway. A pause, a rustle of fabric. My lungs locked. The front door clicked shut, and I opened my eyes. The silence was a test. If I moved too soon, we could die. I didn't know how long I'd been frozen there. Seconds, minutes. Every breath felt like a betrayal of the stillness I'd promised my daughter. My muscles twitched in protest, but I stayed anchored, cheek pressed against cold tile, heart thudding loud enough I was afraid it would echo through the walls. Sophie didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her small hand curled weakly beneath mine, and I knew she was still with me. I waited. Waited for the rustle of a jacket, for the jingle of keys, for the unmistakable mechanical whir of the garage door. Nothing. Just the click of the front door, and silence so vast it roared in my ears. He was gone, for now. I shifted, first my fingers, then my wrist. Fire surged up my arm like 1,000 needles exploding into circulation. My head throbbed, the dizziness still dancing at the edges of my vision. But I moved. That alone felt like a miracle. Sophie whimpered as I pulled her closer. Her skin was clammy, lips pale. "Mommy, are we going to die?" she whispered. "No," I breathed, though I didn't believe it yet. "Not tonight. I dragged us toward the bathroom, our closest sanctuary, and my knees scraped against the floor. Each inch took everything. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered, distorted by fear and fatigue. Sophie tried to help, but her legs trembled beneath her. Inside the bathroom, I turned on the faucet full blast. The noise felt enormous, too loud, but I needed it. A cover, a shield. I dropped to my knees before the sink. My reflection stared back, eyes wild, face pale, lips trembling. I didn't look like a nurse. I looked like prey. But I didn't have time for that. I shoved my fingers down my throat. The reaction was immediate, violent. Bile and half-digested mashed potatoes spilled into the sink. My stomach clenched again, trying to purge the poison. My legs shook. My ribs ached. But it was working. "Do it," I told Sophie. "You have to throw it up, baby. Now." She cried, but nodded. I held her hair back as she gagged, her small body convulsing with each retch. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I whispered encouragement, even as the world tilted. We were getting it out. It wasn't over. Not yet. When we finished, I grabbed the emergency flashlight from under the sink. Old, heavy, chipped paint. But it worked. I wrapped Sophie in my hoodie, the fabric swallowing her frame. She looked so small, so breakable. The house was still. I crept to the laundry room, flashlight off. Every step was calculated, silent, deliberate. The garage door loomed ahead, a dark slab of uncertainty. I reached for the manual release. It groaned, loud, shrill, metallic. My heart stopped. I waited. No footsteps, no shouts, just the whisper of wind outside. I cracked the door open just enough to peek. No car, no silhouette on the street, just darkness and damp leaves rustling on the lawn. "Go," I mouthed to Sophie. She hesitated for a breath, then bolted. Barefoot, she sprinted across the grass, hair flying behind her like a whisper of light in the shadows. I followed, legs numb but moving. The flashlight clutched in my fist like a weapon I barely had strength to swing. She reached Mrs. Hale's porch and pounded on the door with every ounce of strength her little fist could summon. The porch light flicked on. The door swung open. Mrs. Hale gasped, catching Sophie as she nearly collapsed into her arms. Then she saw me. "What? Dear God, what happened?" "No time," I rasped, stumbling up the steps. "He poisoned us. Call 911, now." She didn't hesitate. She yanked us inside, slammed the door, locked it, grabbed the phone with one hand, pulled blankets from the couch with the other. "2 people," she told dispatch. "A child. Poisoning. Suspect fled the scene. Hurry!" Sophie curled into my lap as we collapsed onto the floor. My back pressed against the cabinet. My fingers trembled around hers. I listened. Sirens. They were still far off, but they were coming. The room swam in and out of focus. Mrs. Hale's voice blurred. Sophie shivered under the blanket, her cheek against my chest. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. The sirens wailed in the distance. Claire collapses on Mrs. Hale's floor. As they wrap Sophie in a thermal blanket, I whispered, "We're alive, but this isn't over." The hospital lights felt like judgment. Too bright, too honest. But Sophie was breathing. That was all I needed. Machines beeped steadily beside me, and the scent of antiseptic clung to everything. My gown, the sheets, the air itself. I blinked against the glare, every light in the room sharper than it should have been. The ceiling tiles above me had tiny cracks spidering through them, and I counted them to stay grounded. 1, 2, 3. Sophie lay in the bed next to mine, wrapped in a thin white blanket, her face turned toward me. Her lips were pale, but she was warm, alive. A nurse adjusted the IV at her side and smiled at me. Soft, apologetic, but I could see the tightness behind her eyes. She'd read the chart. She knew. I used to be the one standing in her place, chart in hand, moving from room to room with confidence, purpose. Now I was the one being monitored, the one people whispered about in the hallway. I tried to sit up. Pain pulsed through my skull, dull and rhythmic, like a metronome set just slightly too fast. A man in a gray jacket stepped closer from the corner. "Claire Hartley?" I nodded. the motion heavier than it should have been. Detective Moore, Charleston PD. His voice was clipped, professional. No sympathy, but not cold either. Just efficient. The way I liked it, when I was still working shifts. He pulled a small notebook from his coat and opened it, flipping past a few pages. We've confirmed the substance in your system was a high dose of benzodiazepine. Crushed, likely dissolved into a warm starch. Mashed potatoes, maybe? I looked down at my hand, fingers twitching against the blanket. Yes, I said. Too smooth, too creamy. I should have known. He made a note. The phone at the scene was disabled, he continued. Battery removed, landline cord severed. My breath hitched. Not just malice, then. Planning, calculation. Moore glanced up. Ms. Hartley, do you feel able to walk me through the events? I closed my eyes for a moment, summoning the sequence. The flicker of Dylan's smile. The false warmth in his voice. The glue-thick potatoes. The way his hands had moved over the sink. Not panicked, not rushed, just scrubbing. Like it was routine. Like we were done. He was calm, I said. Like we were just done. Moore didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, but he didn't interrupt either. I kept going. I told him everything. How I'd realized what he'd done, how I'd faked being unconscious, how I whispered to Sophie to stay still, how we crawled, vomited, ran. He scribbled it all down, pausing only once to glance at a buzzing phone in his pocket, which he ignored. When I finished, the silence between us was thick with implication. Do you know where your husband might have gone? He asked. I let out a hollow laugh. Number. But if he planned this, he planned his exit too. Moore finally checked his phone, his brow furrowed. He fled the house before officers arrived. His car is gone. No activity on his primary bank accounts, but he tapped the screen. We found something. A storage unit registered under the name Daniel Reed. It's locked, but we're getting a warrant now. I met his eyes. That's not desperation, I said quietly. That's a plan. And I knew. Whatever was inside would prove this wasn't desperation. It was a plan. I thought I knew how deep betrayal could go, until my sister walked in with a secret she'd buried for weeks. The morning sun slanted through the narrow blinds, casting striped shadows across the linoleum floor. The world felt too quiet. Sophie stirred gently in her sleep, curled beneath a fresh blanket, her hand peeking from beneath the edge like a fragile leaf. I sat beside her bed, sipping lukewarm tea that tasted more like metal than comfort. Then I heard the door creak open. Tessa stepped in, shoulders hunched, her travel coat still clinging to her frame. Red eyes, wrinkled blouse. Her purse strap dug into her shoulder like it had been there for hours. She looked like she hadn't slept, and I knew instantly. This wasn't just worry, it was guilt. She closed the door behind her with a soft click, then just stood there, silent. How bad? I asked, my voice flat. Tessa blinked. You mean, with Sophie? I shook my head. With you. The pause that followed was heavy, like the air itself was bracing for what came next. She walked to the window, keeping her back to me. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought maybe it was just a stupid mistake. Tessa, I said quietly, tell me. She turned around, her voice cracked. I saw Dylan 2 months ago, with another woman. My chest tightened. Where? Midtown. That new seafood place, the one with the big patio. I was there for drinks with coworkers. I saw them. He kissed her. I followed them. They went back to a condo. I watched him use a key. The room tilted, not from poison this time, but from the weight of everything collapsing again. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know how, she whispered. You just had that scare with Sophie's asthma. He was acting nicer again. I thought maybe he was trying. I stared at her, trying to find anger, but it was buried under too much. He wasn't trying, I said. He was transitioning. Tessa pulled something from her coat pocket, photos printed on cheap drugstore paper. I took these a week later. I needed to be sure. In the photos, Dylan, smiling, holding hands with a young brunette in a designer coat. They stood in front of a condo building I didn't recognize. In one, he was adjusting her scarf with tenderness I hadn't seen in years. In another, he opened the passenger door for her. I felt like I was watching a ghost of him. Someone who had already left our world, slipped into a new one like a snake shedding skin. "Her name is Lila Spencer," Tessa said. "She's 26. Her father passed in March. Left her a fortune, but with a condition." I didn't look up. "Let me guess. No stepkids, no shared assets, clean slate only." Tessa nodded slowly. "She gets the full inheritance only if she marries someone with no children, no debt, no former marriages that could compromise image." My hand clenched around the teacup. "And Dylan, he's been posing as Daniel Reed. No child, no wife, no past." It hit like a truck. Every smile at dinner, every hollow excuse. The carefully cooked meal, the precision of the poisoning, the severed phone line. He wasn't cheating. He was clearing the board. "He wasn't just cheating," I said, standing slowly. "He was erasing us." Tessa flinched but said nothing. The wall intercom crackled to life, breaking the silence. It was Detective Moore's voice. Cool, calm, businesslike. "Ms. Hartley, suspect located. Charleston International Airport. Moving in now." The detective's voice crackled through the radio. "Suspect located. Charleston International Airport. Moving in." The courtroom was colder than the hospital, but this time I wasn't fighting to survive. I was fighting to end it. The fluorescent lights didn't flicker. The benches didn't creak. But everything in that room felt unnaturally still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I sat upright in the witness chair, spine stiff, palms resting flat against my thighs. My blouse was neatly pressed, my hair pinned back. I dressed like it was just another day at work, like this was procedure, not a reckoning. Dylan sat 10 feet from me, separated by bulletproof glass and 2 bailiffs. His orange jumpsuit was rumpled and his hands were cuffed. He looked smaller than I remembered. Eyes sunken, beard uneven. He hadn't shaved properly in weeks. I couldn't see the man I married anymore, just the outline of someone who once wore his skin. The prosecutor nodded to me gently. "Ready when you are, Mrs. Hartley." I didn't look at Dylan, not once. "I was poisoned on November 12th, I said, my voice even. "My daughter Sophie was poisoned too. The substance was benzodiazepine, crushed and mixed into mashed potatoes my husband prepared for dinner." Gasps rippled faintly through the courtroom, but I didn't pause. "We did not ingest it accidentally. This was premeditated. My husband cooked the meal, served it with full knowledge of what it contained, and watched us eat it. He never called for help. He stood at the sink washing dishes while we lost consciousness." I continued, recounting every moment, each scene not with drama, but with precision. The timeline, the taste, the silence, the whisper. They'll both be gone soon. I was a nurse for over a decade. I know how poison works, and I know what planning looks like. The defense didn't interrupt. Tessa sat behind me in the gallery, holding Sophie's hand. They both wore muted colors, somber. Sophie's feet dangled from the bench. Her hands clutched around the edges of a stuffed bear she hadn't let go of since that night. The trial moved quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. The fake passport, the new identity, the prenup, the storage unit filled with suitcases and burner phones, the photos of Dylan and Lila Spencer, smiling over champagne flutes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreman said. "Life without parole." Dylan didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just stared at me, as though waiting for me to return the gaze. I didn't. Outside the courthouse, the wind had turned sharper. Fall was bleeding into winter. Sophie clung to my coat as we stepped down the stone stairs. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just exhaled. Long, deep, final. 3 weeks later, we moved into a small house across town. Not fancy, but bright. Lots of windows. Hardwood floors. No memories carved into the walls. One Saturday morning, I brewed coffee in the kitchen. The smell filled the air. Nutty, warm. Tessa read the news on her tablet, legs curled under her on the couch. Sophie sat by the bay window, flipping through a book, the light haloing her hair like gold. The front door was locked. I checked it twice now, just to be sure. The kettle whistled. I poured the coffee slowly, watching the steam rise. And I whispered to myself, "You didn't destroy us. You made us stronger. And if he ever wonders what became of us, we lived." The man who once called himself her protector sat behind bars, stripped of every illusion he'd tried to craft. What began as quiet suspicion ended in a courtroom where truth finally had a voice. And that voice did not tremble. Justice was not handed to her. It was fought for, inch by inch, through fear, silence, and fire. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. Sometimes, survival is not just breathing, but choosing to speak, to stand, to remember. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth.